Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's program. I'm Guy Shiraki from the Chester County Chamber of Business and Industry. Our chamber, along with the Chester County Bar Association, is presenting today's program. To begin the program, I want to introduce a member of our board here at the chamber and representing today's sponsor for this program, Meridian Bank, Mr. Jeff Sheehan. Jeff is one of the senior vice presidents at Meridian and a valued member of our board. Jeff, thanks for being today's sponsor, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Guy. Happy to be a part of this today. I think Meridian Bank, we're a locally headquartered bank doing a lot of business all over the Delaware Valley, but with a strong focus on business. And whether you're starting a business, growing a business, selling a business, or as a business owner, you're building wealth, transitioning wealth through any of those phases of the cycle of being a business or business owner. You need really sound advice. And there's three very important things, we believe you need. One is a good bank, two is a good accountant, and third, and probably most importantly from day one, is a good attorney. So that's why we're happy to be a part today. And that's our introduction to the panel, I think. Take it away.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate Meridian's support and your service volunteering to be a member of our board of directors. Our chamber has been working with different vital partners throughout the region to bring forth a series of events to help small businesses in particular, but all businesses, but understanding the special needs of small businesses through the last 2 years that have been unlike any other. You've probably had changes in the way you work, the way your colleagues work, the way you keep your business at home. And we thought that it was important as we get back into 2021's economy, begin to reopen. We've put together a series of events with valued partners from the region on how to get back to work and questions you may have. And you may have faced issues you've never faced before or things you took for granted. You now want to make sure you get professional advice. Last month, we presented an event on human resource issues. Later this month, we're going to present an event on accounting and tax issues. But today, the focus is on legal expertise. We have a panel of Chester County attorneys, men and women who are experienced not only in the law, but in working with clients of all sizes. And we thought it was important, as we were hearing more and more questions, to find a way to allow you to ask questions, not only that you could solve today, but so that you understand in the future what kind of questions, what type of attorney, whether you need a law firm on retainer, or the things you might need to protect your business, to protect yourself at work, or to protect your home, or hopefully at some point to grow your business. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt Holliday. Matt is the executive director of the Chester County Bar Association, the co-presenter for today's event, and Matt's going to serve as our moderator. Thank you, Matt, for the Bar Association service, especially over the last year, and thank you for your willingness to partner with us. Thanks for being here today. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Guy, and thank you to the Chester County Chamber of Business and Industry for putting this program together. We think this is a really important thing for folks to have available to them, not just for legal expertise they may need for their businesses, but obviously at some point in your life, almost every single person in today's society is going to require some legal expertise, whether it's family law, will and estates, property, real estate, etc. There's always going to be a need to have a lawyer at some point at your beck and call to help you out and get through life's hurdles. So I'm thrilled to be able to represent the Chester County Bar Association today. I do want to put in a brief plug for the Bar Association. All three of our panelists today are very prominent and well-respected members of the Chester County Bar Association. We have over 1,000 attorneys, including Guy Shiraki, who are members. And we also have a lawyer referral service program that each of today's panelists are either directly a part of, or they have an associate or partner at their firm who are part of that program. The program itself has almost about 100 lawyers who are part of it, and they represent collectively 77 different subsection area of expertise of the law. And that just goes to show you how multifaceted our complicated litigious society has become, that there are so many areas of expertise that require representation. So if you're ever in need of an attorney, we encourage you to reach out to the Chester County Bar Association and use our lawyer referral service to obtain one. And with that being said, I would now like to introduce our three illustrious panelists. Mr. Joel Frank, who's the managing partner of Lamb Mackerlane, Mr. Patrick McKenna, who's chair of the management committee at Gothrop Greenwood, and Ms. Jennifer Fink, who is the owner and founder of Fink Family Law. And so now that brings me to my first question. And before I pose it, I do want to say that any audience member who has questions should feel free to type it into the chat so that when we get to that portion of the program around 10:20, I can be actively asking your questions rather than just the ones we came up with that we thought might interest you. So our first question I will direct to Ms. Fink first, and that is, what's the most common misconception when a possible client reaches out to you for the first time?
So for me, I practice family law, which involves a lot of divorce and custody matters. And one of the biggest misconceptions that people have is that there's a cut and dry answer right out of the gate. They oftentimes will want to know, what they're going to walk away with or what they stand to lose, which is something that I cannot answer in an initial consultation. A lot of factors go into deciding that. And so it's not something, sometimes I think people get a little frustrated that they can't walk out of a consultation with a clear understanding of exactly what they're going to either obtain during a divorce or lose during a divorce. Another misconception that I get on the custody side is that somehow if you are paying child support, you should be afforded more custody time, or if you're not paying child support, the child could be withheld. That's not something that we do. There are situations where you could not see your child at all and still have to pay, or you're not paying, you're delinquent, but you still have rights to see your child. So these things get sticky and emotional, but I try to, walk my clients through it and explain the law along the way and help calm their fears.
Thank you, Jen. I would pose the same question to Mr. Frank.
Thank you, Matt, and good evening, good morning, everyone. It's nice to get ahead and appreciate to be a part of the panel. A couple things come readily to mind. First of all, that we're able to go ahead and misconceptions, we're able to go ahead and get into the details of a matter right away. And they want, a client potentially wants some instantaneous feedback. And as my co-panelists know, the rules of professional conduct initially require us to run what's called a conflict check to make sure that we're not adverse, or there's no conflict with representing who's on the other side, etc. So we need to go ahead and run that and ensure that there's no conflict, so we can then get into the details of the case in really what should be a subsequent or follow-up communication. The initial phone call really should be a generalized assessment as to what the issue is, who the parties are. And when I say who the parties are, it's also important, if you're dealing with a business, we need to know who the principals are of that business, the primary principals as well, so that there's a clear conflict check and we can get and move forward in an unimpeded basis. Another misconception that I readily see is that a potential client will come to you and expects you to have an expertise in all different areas, not recognizing that more and more the law has become very, very refined, and that you have an expertise or a specialty, if you will, in certain areas, but you can't be all things to all people. And that's why certain firms such as ours, and I know Patrick's as well, are more full service. So you can get ahead and actually hand somebody off to somebody who has already a background in a specific area that you personally may not have a specific knowledge base in.
Thank you, Joel. And last but certainly not least, I would pose the same question to Patrick McKenna.
Thanks, Matt. Good morning. Thank you also to Guy in the chamber for this opportunity. It's nice to see everyone, if not virtual. So Jennifer and Joel obviously sort of stole my thunder a little bit, but I agree wholeheartedly. I think the biggest misconception is that with one phone call in a half an hour, we're going to have a black and white answer. Some areas of the law that may be the case. There may be a clear delineation that we can tell somebody yes or no, but in 9 out of 10 times, that's just not the answer. We don't generally have all of the facts either readily available to us for that first phone call. The more digging you do, the more that comes to light, because there's always two sides to the story as we come to learn. So I think that's primarily the biggest misconception, that we can just give you the answer, hopefully, that you're looking for all very quickly. The second, I think from my practice, I do a lot of real estate, land use and zoning work, is essentially that if you go through the process, and there's a lot of government process that I deal with, that you should just be entitled to the outcome that you're seeking simply because you went through all the machinations of doing it. And so it can be difficult to temper expectations also with the timelines of how long things will take. I think people would expect things, particularly in the law, to move quicker than they oftentimes do. And particularly with COVID, nothing's moving very quick these days. So I think those are probably my two biggest takeaways for misconceptions from a client standpoint.
Thank you, Patrick. Next, I'm going to pose a few different questions to panelists, and we can then flip who's answering which one after the fact if we are still waiting for some audience questions. I would again remind the audience to please type any questions they have into the chat, because as of right now, I am seeing none. And you certainly don't want me making up questions for the panelists, because I'll ask them what they had for lunch yesterday. So going back to Mr. Frank, what do you generally think is the appropriate or necessary time for a business person to have an attorney on a retainer to call and get advice as needed from time to time? What set of criteria do you think has to occur for a business to be in that point where they engage in that relationship?
Yeah, I mean, quite honestly, Matt, we have 43 attorneys here now. And I'm not sure that quite honestly, any of our clients are on an ongoing retainer basis per se. As the laws develop, it's not strictly hourly. Sometimes it's flat fee. There's many different types of fee billing now that attorneys have available to them, and it's really a matter of what's comfortable with the client and a given client, given their set of circumstances and the law firm itself. We really, like I said, don't have anybody on a regular retainer. We obviously have longstanding clients that we hear from on a regular basis, but we just go ahead and bill them, quite honestly, on an established basis, whether it's hourly or flat fee. And if you talk a flat fee, to an extent, that could be a retainer base, but that's not a regular fee mechanism that we tend to go ahead and utilize here at Lamb McElwain.
So Joel, follow up then. I think, words like retainer are common in our media culture, and we've all watched, Boston Legal or something at some point that uses those terms. But obviously you just hit on another key term for the legal profession, which is a longstanding relationship. And is it safe to say that Lamb McElwain probably does have quite a few clients who have gone back to you time and time again for various needs for their business?
Yeah, that's very fair to say, Matt, and something we take, quite honestly, a lot of pride in. Most of the clients, quite honestly, are longstanding clients that we have. And again, that's one of the benefits, as I alluded to briefly. We have like 43 attorneys here, and as I tell people in my quote-unquote elevator speech, we could probably provide, advice and legal representation to 90% whatever anybody's issues are. And we're fortunate enough that we have, we represent mom and pop startups up to and through actually Fortune 100 companies. So, that gives us that wide range of basis. As you know, we're primarily headquartered here in Westchester, but we also have offices in Newtown Square in Philadelphia as well. But that longstanding nature, again, as it's important for a client to have, trust, obviously, in their attorney, have that attorney be knowledgeable and very importantly, responsive. And if you go ahead and you have those three primary criteria, I think you form those longstanding relationships, and the client has that comfort level to come back to you on a repeated basis. And, part of the trust that I allude to too is, on occasion, we'll get asked a question that, quite honestly, we don't have the expertise in. So we'll forward it out or refer it out to someone else who has an existing expertise, as opposed to trying to recreate the wheel at the client's expense for something that we really don't know much about.
Thank you, Joel. Patrick, I will put the same question to you and see if there's any thoughts you have on specific scenarios in which a business, perhaps a small business, medium, large, really need to ensure that they have a good relationship with a firm or a specific attorney to be able to go to as needed.
Sure. So on the concept of retainer, I would certainly agree with Joel. We don't have anyone that I'm aware of that's utilizing that scenario, and I don't see it much these days. Some time ago, I read a statistic, I think in like the Pennsylvania Law Weekly, that it takes on average about 18 months from the time an attorney meets someone until they establish enough of a trust to become a client. So when you consider just the amount of time that you have to go into to establish that level of trust for someone's going to give you their hard-earned money to help them with a problem, I think it's incredibly valuable to what Joel says, is to have these long-standing clients. It could start from as simple as someone coming to you that needs a will, and the next thing you know, they're starting up a business and they've come back to you for the business work, and whatever that snowballs into from that perspective. Maybe they're looking to build a home and they need some help with the development. You have somebody that you can then refer them to. I think one of the prideful moments for us as a firm is that long-standing client that you've had for 20 and 30 years. For me personally, it's some of the municipalities in Chester County that we've represented for a number of decades. There is a value to institutional knowledge that you can't really put down on paper, and you can't put a number on. But the fact that you've been there from the beginning is something that is invaluable, in my opinion. You might not be the person working on the matter for the client, but you might be the contact for them, so that they have a comfort level to come to you and know that even though you might not be the person who's handling that workers' compensation matter, you're going to oversee it and make sure that the person in your office is going to get it done for them. So I like to think that in terms of dollars and cents, that trust level and that experience also has a value, sort of an intangible value, I think, for the client.
Thank you, Patrick. Jennifer, what do you generally ask a client to do ahead of time or prepare before they meet with you for the first time? Jen, you're on mute. There you go.
So before I meet someone for the first time, generally I want them to come with a good idea of what they think their legal issue is. Sometimes they come in and they think, that they have one legal issue, but really it turns into something else. Or maybe there's more than one legal issue once we get, to talking. And I really want them to also come to me with what their expectations are. And also we have forms here for different kinds of cases that we handle. So for divorce, there's certain information that has to go into a petition that I'll ask for. With custody, there's a whole other set of information that I'll need. And I have that already in a form for clients to fill out before they come in. Obviously, I want to know what their concerns are, anything that they're really worried about that they want to discuss. People get nervous when they come into an attorney's office, and sometimes they forget to ask questions. And then, they'll come back later and say, oh, I forgot to ask these 10 things because I was so upset. I was so nervous. So I say, please just take some time to write down what you think your questions are, what's important to you, so that we can have that meaningful conversation while you're here. And try not to be nervous and forget what it is that you wanted to ask.
Thank you, Jennifer. Joel, I'll put the same question to you from the perspective of business law and commercial litigation.
Yeah, exactly, Matt, and thanks for that. To add on to what Jennifer said, it really is very helpful, especially in litigation context, if the client can first come in with a written narrative or provide a written narrative in advance of the first meeting, obviously once the conflict check clears that I previously alluded to, including like a timeline as well. And then a lot of times documents are involved, right? I'm not looking to get a stack, 12 inches thick, but get those key documents to us as well. That makes it an easier and more efficient process for the attorney to evaluate, the case and make recommendations. It's also important in doing that evaluation or doing that narrative in advance that they give an accurate assessment, right? I mean, there's always, in any case, there's good facts and there's bad facts. So it's really important to have that trust relationship that I alluded to earlier where, the client can say, hey, look, this is why I think I have a good case, et cetera, but here's a couple of issues that give me some concern about what maybe I might have not, maybe what I did not do entirely properly, et cetera, so that the attorney who's evaluating the given matter can actually do an accurate assessment and consequently give helpful information, useful information back to the actual client. Having that information presented in advance and including in an organized fashion, also look, it's more efficient and consequently costs the client less money to get ahead if it's a more efficient process to have everything laid out in advance.
Thank you, Joel. We do have 2 questions that have come in from the audience. So I will pose the first one, and if there's a specific panelist who feels that it's in their best interest, actually it's probably going to be Jen in this one. Does a client have any rights regarding billing disputes, specifically family law, following a divorce decree being issued, a firm billing numerous hours without any client engagement? Jen, you're on mute.
So I would start with speaking with the firm or with the attorney who did the billing, and try to reach a resolution that way. Certainly, if you're disputing the bill, you want to start at the firm level. If you really feel like you've been billed for things that didn't take place, you always can file a complaint. I don't like to encourage that. I really would much rather people work things out at the firm level, but you do have that recourse that you could file a complaint if you think that you were wrongfully billed. And that,
sorry, go ahead, Jim.
That complaint would be with the disciplinary board.
Well, I would add to that as well. The Chester County Bar Association has a fee dispute committee and an entire process. So that's kind of along the lines of what Jen was saying as well. It's always good as a first step to go to the firm that you had contracted with and see if you can work it out directly. Once you involve the Bar Association, it's kind of more of a third party neutral individual who's an attorney will hear the fee dispute, but you do need the lawyer to agree to enter into the discussion. And we try to handle it here at our level. And then, of course, if it's a real ethical conundrum beyond that, as Jen mentioned, there's always the disciplinary board, but we really try to avoid that. Joel, was there something you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, Matt, if I could jump in too. I mean, it's important to have that attorney-client communication on an ongoing basis, so that the first, for example, I know that, we go ahead, no matter what the matter, send out monthly bills with detailed work as to what was performed. And it's a client's right to go ahead and receive those bills, with communication with the attorney at the outset as to how they're going to be billed. But it's important, if a client does have an issue with the billing, don't let it linger. I mean, I'm happy to go ahead, or whoever is happy to go ahead and discuss a specific billing line item, or further explain what actually transpired to give rise to, for example, 2 hours on a given task. But I'm a lot more receptive to having that dialogue when, again, assuming the client receives bills on that monthly basis, to timely deal with it, as opposed to when the case is over or 6 months down the line, have a client then raise that for the first time. We'll obviously still address that, but it's more prudent to have a timely discussion with your attorney if in fact there's any billing dispute or billing issue.
Thank you, Joel. I want to put the next question to Patrick. Patrick, I know you do a lot of municipal law, but you do deal with a good amount of landlords at that level as well. What credible resources would you recommend for landlords to leverage to stay relevant with the law?
So let me sure I understand the question, Matt. In other words, what sort of like print materials or something that landlords can rely on?
I would assume that's what they're referring to, but obviously if you have a recommendation for working with a lawyer to stay relevant in what's going on with the law, that's great.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I'm not sure I have a specific answer for us because we're constantly getting the case law updates. That's sort of my resource. I'm not exactly sure of anything that I would be able to recommend other than, and maybe Joel would know, I'm thinking like the Realtors Association or something to that, or some local association to that effect. But I'm not sure I know of anything specific off the top of my head that we utilize. For me, it's more, it's a lot of work, but we get so many publications from the Pennsylvania Bar Association or from the different local organizations with the case law updates, that's how we stay up to date on what we're actually reading. So, and what's coming down from the courts. I'm not sure of a sort of a specific newsletter or group that I would recommend for them necessarily, which is a terrible answer, I recognize, but I don't know if any of my colleagues have anything more specific to offer on that.
No, I think we're all in agreement with you, Pat. It's complex, and being able to refer to a lawyer is probably helpful for them to make sure they're on the right side of all the changes. Next up, I have a question that I will say, I'll read out loud, and if there's a panelist who specifically feels they can address it, please just raise your hand and jump in. I'm looking to start my business as a life coach and content creator. Legally, where should I begin to protect my business and protect my intellectual property as a resident here in PA?
Okay, I'll go ahead and jump in. Yeah, it's important, number one, anytime you're starting a business, you want to actually protect your own personal assets from that of the business itself. And there's a lot of different, forms that could get ahead and take. It could be a limited partnership, a limited liability corporation, a S Corp, a C Corp. And it really depends upon, how big you are at a given time, what your ultimate goals and objectives are. So I know, we have, business attorneys here. I know Patrick does as well. To go ahead and that are really refined to answer those questions and give advice once we hear exactly what your ultimate goals and objectives are, as Jennifer indicated at the outset. We need to hear what you want to have accomplished, and then we could go ahead and establish the appropriate forum to go ahead and help you achieve your goals and objectives.
And Matt, I would add, Joel is 100% correct. The corporate formation, I think, is your ultimate first goal. In terms of protecting your content, your intellectual property, not something that our firm actually handles. One of the few things that we don't handle. That's a very particularized practice, an area of the law. But I do know there are attorneys in Chester County that handle intellectual property matters, and that's probably your second place that you're going to want to reach out to and check in, and whether it's a copyright materials, but it's how to protect your content, particularly on your website. Because it's your work product. That would be, I think, my recommendation. There is a specific practice area. It's sort of unlike what everybody else does. And I think it would be prudent to find an attorney that handles that area.
Yeah, and this is not necessarily the case with the individual that's asking the question, but a lot of times several times, people have a misconception as to what's intellectual property and what can actually be protected or not. So, as Patrick alluded to, I think the first stop is with the business attorney. And then if it truly turns out to be protectable intellectual property, a referral can then take place to an appropriate specialist.
Right. I'll jump in from a banker's perspective too. I'll stress the importance of setting up that legal structure with sound advice from day one is very important, because you're going to grow the business and get to a point where you are bankable and want to get bank loans or continue to grow. And we see everything come across our desk. So having just a good, sound legal structure, it doesn't have to be played with and modified too much. Makes life easier along the way of the business too.
And I'm still surprised, Jeff, to your point. I have real estate clients, developers, who will buy parcels of land, 60, 80, 100 acres of land in their own personal or their spouse's names, and they will develop it in that fashion with dozens of homes on them, and instead of in a corporate entity. Sort of baffles me today still that's not occurring, and that's when I find that it sort of takes my breath away and say, I really want to protect you on this. You may not even have been thinking about it, but the fact that you've got this all in your personal name is exposing potentially your own personal assets. If something were to go bad here, we've got to address that immediately.
Yeah. And not to jump to the next webinar, but having that good sound counsel advice and also a CPA up front, because there's tax implication in what you described too, moving assets between entities, buying, selling, transitioning. So good sound advice from day one is an investment in your business. It's not necessarily an expense.
Thank you, gentlemen. We also had a question come in. How do I find a business attorney to discuss the pros, cons of incorporation and the various types of corporation? Is there anyone who wants to jump on that? Joel.
Yeah, again, really referral, a lot of our cases, a lot of clients, a lot of Pat's, I'm sure your Jennifer's as well, come in through referral. So you want to ask your own individual network for, attorneys with whom that, others have dealt that, had very good experiences with. And, in today's world, check out the websites, right? I mean, all the firms now have pretty detailed and extensive websites. And, again, not all firms can be everything to all people. Again, Jennifer's is much more specialized than Patrick's firm or my firm, with more of a widespread basis, et cetera. But that's probably your best, what I would recommend the two. Number one, other businesses or friends or relatives that you've had that you trust their judgment and had good experiences. You ask them who they use. That's one starting point. The other is, again, especially if you're looking in Chester County, more locally, hop on websites, et cetera, do the whole Google thing, and you'll have a nice selection from which to choose.
I realize I'm a moderator and not a panelist, but I will add to that by just saying the Chester County Bar Association Lawyer Referral Service Program is really designed to be a clearinghouse for you. We have all the experts in the various areas of law assigned by panel. You may end up with someone at Joel's firm or Pat's firm, or if you're experiencing family law, you may end up with Jennifer Fink or her law partner, Ryan Buchanan. But essentially the program works that you call the number that I just put in the chat, which is 610-429-1500. And then you will be assigned to an attorney. You'll pay $25 and that'll get you half hour's time consultation with the attorney you're assigned to. And then that attorney will do their best to give you a sense of what your situation looks like, how it will be handled, and what fee structure will exist to come to resolution going forward after that. So that's also a great way, if you don't have the time or inclination to reach out to your networks to find lawyers. This is an easy way to get assigned to someone. Are there any other questions from the audience? I believe I've asked all the ones I have at this point. Jen, you want to add something?
I just want to add that more and more I'm seeing people who are starting up businesses and they are about to get married and they come to me for prenuptial agreements. So I just wanted to put that out there, that that's another thing that you can think about if you haven't already started your business and you want to exclude any increase in value on that business or any part of that from the marital pot. The time to do that is before you get married. That makes it a little easier if the marriage ever dissolves. And some people enter into postnuptial agreements, so they know how they're going to divide things. Should the marriage fail and come to an end. I also have plenty cases where people didn't realize that the husband or the wife or the spouse could take, part of the business or have an equity stake in the business. So that's just something that people should think about when they're forming their businesses and forming their relationships at the same time.
All right, Guy, did you have anything you wanted to add? Any questions?
Yeah, I had a question, and I know it's going to sound sort of philosophical, and I don't mean it that way, but I'd be interested in each of your perspectives because of the way the economy has been. We're at an interesting time where folks are being more entrepreneurial. One, because it's our creative way as Americans, and the other is as a resource and try to combat the fact that maybe your work is shut down or not operating. So the question I really have is, what would be your advice? When does an idea or a side enterprise, when does it become a business? At what point do you need professional help? When does your side hustle become a business and you should think about incorporating or protecting yourself or your family or your assets?
I mean, to me, Guy, pretty much early on, you're very much at the outset. I think as Jeff indicated earlier on, not only you have legal implications, but attended to those legal implications, you have tax implications, right? And potentially tax benefits even at the very beginning if you have losses. That's a tax benefit you could take advantage of as well. So I think as I tell, people, you can pay some upfront to get appropriately established, or you could go ahead and pay later on once problems develop, which tends to be a lot more expensive. So it's worth that initial investment at the very outset to set things up correctly. They can be altered or modified as the circumstances dictate as the business develops. But pretty much at the outset would be my recommendation to get things in order.
I would add to what Joel said. It makes more sense to me when I try to tell a client is I recognize you may be spending more money upfront than you wanted to or that you contemplated, but the best thing that could happen is that you spend this money and then you never hear back from me having to address the problem. So if it means a little bit more upfront to save you over the next 20 years, you have to think of it from a long-term business plan solution. I would hate for you not to have invested that time and effort initially, only to then have an issue come up 5 years down the line that's going to then threaten your business. So you have to look at it as a cost of doing business, but also as a long-term investment in your business.
So Patrick, I think we just stumbled onto an interesting additional question, which is, as attorneys who are preeminent in your fields, all three of you, and have been practicing for quite a while, obviously you have friends, you have family, you have colleagues who are lay people and outside of the legal sector. Can you identify a scenario, not a specific person's name or anything, but a scenario in which you have felt that someone maybe should have obtained an attorney to get a better outcome for whichever particular life issue they were going through, and you wish that they would have gotten an attorney because ultimately they did not get a favorable outcome by just going through it and not seeking counsel? Sure.
So the two scenarios that jump to mind for me, the divorce setting. So with everything Jennifer is saying, unfortunately, these days it's all too uncommon. So I know a number of my friends who have gone through that, who would have benefited from having legal advice during the process. And again, I think we're thinking, I don't have the money, or I'm not inclined to spend the money. This is something that I can do on my own. I see that in my practice area from the land use and zoning perspective, with the landowner who thinks I'm going to go and make application with the township to do whatever, for an expansion of my home or to build a garage, not knowing what it is they have to prove, not knowing the plan that they need to provide, only to get denied because they didn't think it was worth hiring an attorney to guide them through the process. So that happens for me on a pretty much weekly basis. We see applicants going through that. Not to suggest that you can't go through without an attorney, but I have seen it happen where knowing and being on the other side representing the zoning hearing boards, knowing that if you'd had just a little bit of guidance, you probably could have gotten the outcome that you wanted.
So along those lines as well, you shouldn't really run and hide from a problem, right? I mean, we're heavy on litigation here, at the firm, and we've had on more than one occasion, clients come up to us, hey, I've got a trial next week. Can you help me out? Well, it's already been, the matter's been in existence for a year and a half already, and the client has potentially ignored it for whatever reason. And last minute, a panic sets in, and they're looking for assistance and some help. So it's just a piece of advice. It's not a pleasant experience to go through litigation, no matter in what context, but sometimes it's a necessary evil. But don't ignore it. Get attorneys involved at the outset. And again, it can hopefully help circumvent and potentially resolve the process earlier.
So, Ben, did you want to add? It looks like you're trying to unmute yourself.
Yes. So definitely during divorces, like Patrick said, sometimes people trust that their spouse won't behave a certain way, or they think that things that make common sense to them automatically transfer to what the law says. And that's not the case at all. Specifically, someone comes to mind that wholeheartedly trusted her spouse and thought that he would never do anything to pull the wool over her eyes. And she got a really bad deal out of it because she trusted him. Had she had counsel, her counsel would have dug into the finances, would have seen what was in the marital estate, and she would have fared much better in that case.
Thank you, Jen. I know Guy has some questions that he'd like to pose to the panel.
So we've begun a process of reopening, and it's probably something that's going to happen over the next several weeks and months at businesses of different sizes as you re-engage. So I wanted to throw out a few questions and would invite the panel to pick any aspect that they feel comfortable with or some general guidance. And the one is from sort of the from the employer or the manager side. You're going to start asking employees to come back or to work more hours. How should they approach that? From the employee standpoint, what are things you can tell your employer if you have some issues at home or some apprehension about coming back to the workplace 40 hours a week? And then for Jennifer, I can only imagine that over the last year, that thousands of families where there's shared custody issues or custody issues in general, you have one spouse that has been home or the others at work or the others at home, and all of a sudden, who's watching the children for 15, 18 hours a day becomes an issue. So if you have some guidance on that, because I imagine we're going to have a lot of situations where one spouse is going to go back to work and the other isn't, and how we're handling it. So either from the employer, employee, or the child custody or watching the kids, any insights or counsel as we all try to smartly, safely do this, go through this whole process of reopening.
So I think if you're lucky enough to be in a situation where you have children and you also work, and if you can work from home, that's always a good thing. So for example, my associate works from home 3 days a week so that he can take care of the children and work at the same time while they're doing their virtual schooling. And then he's in the office a couple of days a week. Now, if he has court, he has to scramble for childcare, obviously, and each person is going to have those individual situations where they have to find childcare. But if you're in a flexible situation, and a lot of times smaller businesses, I find do have that flexibility, that tends to work well for people. I cannot work from home. I have 6 children. It's not something that I could do and still focus on my work. But I'm lucky enough that I'm in a position where my husband works less hours than I do, so he can be home, more often. So I think families in general, have to make these decisions between themselves. And again, we see a lot of marriages suffering right now because they can't, figure out a way to make these things work. And sometimes when people come in and they're talking about divorce, and I recognize that they're having these types of issues, I may recommend that they, talk to a family counselor, things of that nature before they dive into dissolving the marriage.
And from the employer-employee context, Guy, I mean, from an employer standpoint, we really just want to go ahead and be prudent and be responsible. I mean, there's no hard and fast guidelines right now. I know some legislation was actually introduced. I don't know if it was actually passed, you may know, Guy, where to give actually employers protection as long as they were going ahead and having reasonable accommodations that were made as far as safety within the workplace, et cetera. But really from our perspective, as long as people are masked up, et cetera, anybody who actually does test positive still needs to adhere to the guidelines and stand down for 10 days until they get the negative test back, et cetera. So it's a matter really quite honestly of common sense and prudence. And really, as from a liability standpoint, as opposed to a practical standpoint, employers are in fact protected if in fact they just act reasonably and don't require, for example, somebody who had a positive test to nonetheless come in, potentially infect other people, et cetera.
It's an interesting question, and actually well timed at our partners meeting last month. From a personal standpoint, from our firm standpoint, it's an issue that we've now openly begun discussing. Guy, what's our plan? And so I don't have an answer for you yet. We're actually beginning that process. But as I sat here listening to Joel and Jennifer, it occurs to me of what a shift it's been in almost now exactly a year. I started working from home on March 13th of 2020, and the concept was so foreign to me. How could I ever not be in the office? And then a year later, for many people, it's how do I ever get back in, right? So a lot of it is going to be perception, I think, and comfort level. And I agree with Joel about being smart with your reopening plan. I think you have to be honest with your employees. I think you have to keep your communication line open. I think you need to be patient. I think you need to hear the concerns. I think it's a little easier for a service industry like a law firm in that I generally don't see clients in person most of the time. Where I would see them is when I'm out at my night meetings and we're having them in person. So I'll be quite honest with you, whether it was the pandemic or not, 85% of my practice is email, which is unfortunate, but that's the reality of today's situation. And also before the pandemic, there was almost a reluctance to utilize the technology. Well, we use Zoom 10 times a day now. I couldn't even really convince people to FaceTime before then. And that, I think, is now a thing of the past. It really makes us more efficient. It's easier for my clients. They don't have to drive into the borough and pay for parking. They can do it on their lunch break. So the reopening question it's going to be interesting. It's going to mean different things for different people. I think if you're making widgets or you're serving burgers, it's a much more difficult question than it is for the banking industry or the insurance industry or the legal industry. And that's what we're trying to piece together. We want to do it in a fair and reasonable way for our employees. I think the protocols that we've had in place, I can say from experience, have worked. We've been able to stay open. We didn't have any layoffs, which I'm very proud of. We were able to manage through this pandemic, and we're coming through on the other side, I think, stronger for it. So hopefully I'll have an answer with that in the next couple of weeks. If the vaccine rollout was even slightly better, right? I mean, whether locally at the state level, wherever you're looking, if we could have gotten through the 1As and we were on to the 1Bs, if the supply had been there, I think this would have been so much more easy a decision to make. But it is what it is. So I think until that really hits home, and I think before everyone starts to get that sense of comfort, I think there is a sense of comfort with the vaccine. I think it's going to take us a little bit of time to really get comfortable again.
Thank you, Pat. At this time, I would like to invite each of the panelists to share some final comments with us, and I'd like to start with Ms. Fink.
So I just kind of wanted to add to what Patrick was just saying about reopening. I think it's important for business owners to kind of think outside the box, because what we do know is that those who are the quickest to adapt have been more successful to the changing landscape. So for example, our local restaurants, many of them have put together meals to go, family meals to go, where you could pick up on curbside. They're finding ways to continue to make money within their businesses. The veterinarian hospitals are still seeing your pets, but you can't come in. You have to call when you get there. They come out and get your pet. They found ways to still run their businesses while still being COVID safe. My husband is a dentist. For him, it's a little harder. He has to have that face-to-face contact. So for him, there's a concierge service that brings up each patient individually. Personal protection equipment is heavily used. Those types of things. So if you just think outside the box and be smart about COVID and be safe and, try to figure out ways that are accommodating and safe, but still allow you to run your business. People who have adapted very quickly have done better.
Patrick, final thoughts?
Just to say thank you, Matt, and to Guy. Jeff, thank you for your sponsorship and the Meridian for always being there for the chamber. I want to thank Jennifer and Joel, my colleagues, and to just to tell anyone who's thinking about an attorney and whether they need to retain one or not, I view us as a resource. We're here for as much or as little as you would like. Don't be afraid to tell the attorney, thank you, we don't need any more, or I need a little bit more from you. I also think of it, if you're looking for an attorney, it's okay to go get a second opinion like you do with a doctor. You can look around. Just because your uncle said, go use my attorney, doesn't mean that you need to do so. We're here to try to help solve your problems. And it's important that you are as comfortable with us as we are with you.
Thank you, Patrick. Joel?
Yeah, again, I'd like to echo my thanks to Matt, Guy, as well as Jeff and my co-panelists as well. I thought this was a very good session. Listen, we're in the service industry. to enhance or expand upon what Patrick said. So, we're here for you. I think one of the takeaways is, again, with the premise of the topic of today's session is, in fact, how to get a good lawyer, et cetera, to assist you in achieving your goal. So I think one of the primary takeaways is, do it sooner rather than later. Okay. It's not all that expensive. It's worth that upfront investment to potentially avoid some problems of more significance, down the road. It's hard to be successful. It's a competitive world out there. So it really pays you to be aligned properly at the outset, again, with bankers, accountants, lawyers, to get yourself properly positioned to help you best achieve your goals and objectives.
Thank you, Joel. I would like to thank the Chamber and specifically Laura Preby, who worked with us to get this all put together, and Guy for having the idea. And I specifically want to thank all three panelists for taking my text or email immediately and responding within a half hour or less, indicating that they would do this for me. In my particular job, it's very common for me to be calling and asking for something. So I appreciate that they were kind enough to do that. And I also, of course, want to thank Jeff, our sponsors. So thank you all for attending today. And I will hand it back to Mr. Shiraki for closing comments.
Thanks. I want to join everyone in saying thank you to our sponsor, Meridian Bank. I want to thank our attorneys for volunteering their time to do this. Many of you volunteer your time for events like this for the bar, the chamber. Joel was one of our past board chairs. So your involvement today is consistent with your involvement in the community. It's very much appreciated, very much noted. I would just say to our audience and anyone who will be watching this recorded, as a reminder, this is part of a series of events that our chamber is doing. I know the Bar Association does as well. We have a series of events to help small business. You can watch the previous episodes on human relations, human resources events. There's also one we have later this month you can watch and join us live on the 24th dealing with tax and accounting issues. Join us for these programs live, but also use them as a resource, and never hesitate, particularly on legal issues, to ask the Bar Association or the Chamber. One or both of us will find you someone who you can trust and bounce an idea off. Our objective at the Chamber is to have a thriving, growing business community and to make sure that Chester County remains and regains and excels where we were, to have a wonderful business community, but more importantly, a wonderful quality of life. And our legal community and the resources here are part of that. So I want to thank everyone for their time. Thanks to our audience for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at future programs, whether it's on Zoom or in person. Have a great day. Thanks.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you.